Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part, I think it's 21 in the Cobra Jet project known as Slither. I'm outside right now filming through the garage door, so you'll probably hear birds, you may hear my neighbors running some machinery and different things like that, but that's all good. Fall is here and that is a great time to be working on your project. So, in the previous videos, I did some work on the Detroit Speed mini tubs. I also worked on test fitting the Mustangs to Fear roll bar that they offered, and that had problems, as I showed. I've been contacted by, I guess, their chief engineer at Mustangs to Fear, and I think also got a message or saw a message on Facebook, or I mean on YouTube, from, I'm guessing, the owner of Mustangs to Fear. They're not happy with their product. They're happy, they say, that I made the video so they could see the problems, and they're redesigning that roll bar. So that is probably going to be a win for all of us. So, where am I at right now on the project? I am working on the front section of the Cobra Jet. As many of you already know, I have salvaged the shock towers and the rear aprons. I'm salvaging part of the firewall for this car. And now I'm to the point where I want to get some work done on the front of it, because there's not much left to do on the back at this point. I will be doing more on that later when I actually install the quarter panels and the tail panel and all those sort of things, but I want to get some of this front section done. So at this point, to make this happen, if you're going to be working on something like this, just know that you really need to get the firewall in first before you start putting in the frame rails. And let me go over some details on that and show you why that has to happen. So let's take a look at where I'm at this point. As I said before, I have put in the Detroit Speed mini tub on the driver's side, and that is probably 95% finished. I still have some things to do as far as getting this piece here. That's the flange from the inner wheelhouse back. That'll go on top of that and get welded in. On the driver or passenger side, I have been welding in the lower edge of the mini tub to the floor, and I ran out of welding gas, so I just paused on that. But it is also welded in and tacked. I know I can't show you all that, but it's tacked all along the perimeter and against the frame rail itself. So this is all looking really, really good, and I'm very happy with that. Now, the thing is, when you go to put this stuff together, and I made this somewhat of a mistake on the light blue Mustang that I did years ago. I just did a kind of a flashback video on that earlier, that whenever I was trying to put in the new firewall, I didn't realize that you can't put it in with the frame rails in place. The reason for that is just physics. This is at an angle, and when you have the frame rails in, you can't scoop it down inside. It just will not clear that. So you really need to get the firewall in first, and then get the frame rails attached. So at this point, again, I have the upper half of the original firewall. I do have the cowl panel sitting on top. There's nothing holding them in place but gravity. And if you'll notice, I don't know if you can see this very well, these holes line up really well with the original firewall. When I had put in the dynacorn firewall before, those holes did not line up very well. So we're happy with how all that fits. The goal here is to get the firewall in place, and I'll be pulling off these other pieces, getting the upper out and the cowl out of the way, set the firewall in. Now, what I really need to do is prepare everything else. This is the opportunity you have, because the firewall tucks under the floor pan, and that's where you run into a conflict whenever you're trying to snake this in with the frame rails, because you can't get all of the tunnel area. You just can't. Unless you cut something loose and bend it out of the way, it's not going to fit. So what I'll need to do is drill some holes on the floor pan so that when this is in place, I can weld those same areas on the new firewall. Same way with the perimeter of the tunnel. Now, here's the thing. We're going to be using a different transmission, and it may take some modifications to make everything work together. I may have to enlarge the tunnel for the new transmission. So I'm not going to actually weld much of this in if I weld any of it. I may just get it in place and set it there where it needs to be. I may weld along the flat section of the floor pan and leave this part undone so that if I have to cut something loose, I'm not fighting with multiple pieces. I can take one section out. If I may need to remove the actual cross member that supports the tunnel. So I don't want to fight with too many things. Now, there's another piece going in here. If you look down here, that is a frame connector. And that is a form-fitted frame connector. And this front section right there is going to go up around the floor support, and that cutout down there will go around the cross member piece. So you can see that line, hopefully you can see that line that I drew on the floor support. That should be the front edge, should be roughly the front edge of that frame connector. So there's going to be multiple things that have to be fitted together. Another thing I'll have to do is drill holes here and in the bottom and on the inside for the frame rails, so when they get in place I can just weld those in and it'll be fixed. The other things involved is the rear aprons. I already have holes here from where I salvaged those. I may clean those up a little bit just to make sure they fit nice and flush. And those will be attached to the new firewall. So there's going to be a variety of things, because I'll get the firewall in and I'll end up cutting it off because I'm using this upper section of the original firewall. So just kind of, bear with me on this process and follow along as I do this. I also will have to do prep work for the frame rails where they meet the firewall. These angles right here are going to be at the bottom of this section of the firewall. So what I will probably do, get the firewall up in place, put the frame rails up in place, trace the perimeter of these frame rails onto the bottom section of the firewall, take this back out, and then I can drill holes through the firewall. So again, there's multiple steps involved in this process, and it's going to be a lot of putting things on, taking them off, and going back and forth, and hopefully it all makes sense when I get it together. Side note, I have a template. If I have any doubt as to the measurements I'm doing on this car, I now have a template. So more on this car later. This is my Mach 1. I picked it up last week, and I will be building this car at a future date, but for now it's going to serve as a perfect guide for this car. All right, I have everything mounted where I want it, and you can see the nice tight flange on the firewall, and I have marked all the holes where I'm going to make plug welds. Again, I will put some going down through the frame rail as well. I also put a mark right there to show where that line is And I know that the frame rail will angle back in further, but that gives me an idea of where that starts to do that transition. Everything else fits just like it should. I marked the inside of that one, and I've also traced around the flanges on the frame rail. So now I'm going to take everything back apart, start drilling holes. Did I mention this car? So here's where we're at. I have all the holes drilled in the frame rail. I have them on the sides, from the bottom. I have the holes drilled in the firewall. So all that is ready to go. And of course I have the holes punched where the floor pan overlaps the firewall. So here's where it gets interesting. I can't put these on yet until I take care of that firewall. Because once those are in, there's really no room to do any cutting or modifications. So now is the time I have to address this. What I've done is I've taken the original firewall and I clamped it inside of the dynacorn firewall, and I drew a line down here. Maybe hard to see, but I drew a line across, and what I will need to do, if I can get up under there, there is a line there, trust me. What I will need to do is cut this off, but I want to cut it above that line, maybe somewhere into this radius, and of course anywhere in that area is going to be fine. I have to be careful over there so I don't get too close to the mount for the steering column, but I have to cut all that top section off so that I can sandwich these two together, get this clamped in place against the kick panels and against the cowl to make sure it's sitting properly. And then I may have to do a second cut to where I cut the two pieces at the same time and then pinch them together and weld that back together. So this is a turning point. I definitely have to get this addressed because I can't put the frame rails in yet without having that taken care of. I think that went very well. I did the cut, kind of sandwiched the two together, and in just pressing this down inside here, it fits very close. It's not going to take much. That side, same thing. I can push it down over there and it fits very, very close. Now, the goal, I think, is to cut this off and do a butt weld. I think. I don't know that there's really that much that can be seen overall once it's put together. There's no way anybody could see down inside of it. You know, with the engine and transmission, everything in place, and you've got the aprons right here. So I don't know. I'll have to think about it. I want to show you where I'm at in this process. Now, I cut off the upper half of the dynacorn firewall as I had shown, and I have overlapped the remaining piece of the dynacorn panel to the original piece. And I've started cutting it and then welding it together. I can only go so far though at this point. When I get over to that side, I've got a lot of stuff in the way, but I have welded the edge, and I've also welded across parts of the transmission tunnel. And I have put everything on to make sure that things are lined up and where they should be. So like here, I can actually push the firewall out a little bit, and that gap cleans up nice. It's not a very big gap, but just a little bit of effort there. The holes line up on top here for the firewall and the cowl piece. That's with everything, all the bolts sitting on or in the top of the shock towers. And then I started welding over here as well, as I said. So at this point, what I want to do, because I was having trouble trying to find a way to set up the camera to film this stuff. It's really difficult to make those kind of cuts and get in there, you know, when I'm down inside the engine bay and cutting and all that. So just kind of show you where I'm at with this. The plan right now is I'm going to take everything back off, the shock towers, core support, all that stuff, and finish working on the firewall. I want to get all that welded together and solid, and then go on from there. So a lot of times when I'm doing stuff like this here, I'm trying to butt weld two pieces of metal together, and they don't always line up. So what I have in my hand is a very small, very thin screwdriver. And so by manipulating the flange like that, I can bend it one way or the other to get it to line up. Now, of course, as I move along and I start tacking this all together, I will move to a different area and try to make sure that transitions the same way. Here I'm cutting off just a little bit of metal where it is still overlapping and opening that up, and then again setting the screwdriver so that I can make adjustments to the flange itself and then get it welded back together. Now, of course, all I'm going to do with this is do a series of spot welds. I don't want to try to weld a long run on this because you can warp the metal. And this is critical if you're doing, let's say, exterior sheet metal. But in this case, moving along quickly with little spot welds really won't make much difference. It'll still turn out very nice. And you know, for the most part, you can't have welding without grinding. So I'm using the 4.5-inch disc here and just knocking down these welds. And I get a lot of satisfaction out of this, and maybe even it's a bit relaxing for me. But this gives you a chance to see the condition of the welds and whether there's any pits or areas that you may have missed. And of course, I want to make all this as smooth as I can and make it look as nice as I can. I'm using the 4.5-inch grinder here, and I also use the belt sander and sanding discs to make it better. Now here all I'm doing is taking a hammer and dolly and just going over the weld flange, just trying to make it relax a little bit. It's not really that important, but sometimes it does help to help the metal just kind of conform to the shape that you want it to be in. So here's where I'm at right now. I have welded that edge all the way across, and you saw in a time lapse I did grind everything down. The only conflict that I had at all with these two panels fitting together was this kind of corner right here. The dynacorn piece was short, so I had to cut two lines and basically stretch the metal down and then fill those in, and now it transitions very nice. Now there's still a few places where I will have to fill in, you know, little areas, things like that. Maybe a little more welding underneath there. But that's all good. I can fill those in, grind it down, and it'll be very nice. I also, you know, ground down the inside so everything looks good. And I'm happy with how this looks right now. At this point, that'll be the end of this video. I've been trying to get things together on this car, and of course we have to continue to test fit pieces and parts together, and I think I've done a good example of that. I'm very happy with how everything is fitting right now, and I plan to, in the next video, weld everything in. I'll be welding in the firewall, the frame rails. I don't know if I'll get to the cowl or not. It depends on how things go. And I have to cut this a little short simply because I'm preparing to make another road trip. I have to go back to North Carolina to get the rest of the parts for the Mach 1 that I bought last week. There was just too many parts, and I couldn't safely load everything on one trailer to make the trip, so we're going to go back and get the rest of it. So there will be a video on that car sometime in the future. It's not the focus at this point. I'm still focused on Slither and trying to get it back together and ready to go. But again, thank you for watching. If you would, leave a thumbs up and a comment on this video, and share this video. Help keep this channel going and growing. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters. Without them, this would be a lot more difficult to do. I can't tell you how much that side income or that side benefit comes in handy and helps keep me making these videos. So if you're interested in becoming a patron, there is a link in the description below, and if you follow that link, it'll get you there. So anyway, thanks again for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya. And here's a short clip of us picking up the Mach 1 project. So excited about this. I can't tell you, just thrilled. And here's a short clip of Jade.